Sometimes love arrives quietly. Sometimes it grows slowly over time. But every once in a while, it appears in a way so sudden and certain that it feels almost impossible. This was the story of Min-jie and Wamaitha, and it began on a warm Saturday afternoon at a church picnic. The church field was alive with laughter. Families sat on picnic blankets under tall trees while children ran across the grass chasing each other with kites and footballs. Long tables were set up near the edge of the field where volunteers from the Christian radio station arranged drinks, snacks, and barbecue trays. The event had been organized by the station's staff, a casual gathering meant to bring listeners, volunteers, and employees together. Wamaitha stood near one of the tables with her colleague and closest friend from the station. She was laughing about something when she noticed a familiar face across the field. "Is that Bo?" her friend asked. Wamaitha squinted slightly. "Yes, it is. Bo worked with them at the radio station. He was one of the program coordinators and was known for his easy humor and calm personality. But today, he wasn't alone. Standing beside him was a tall man Wamaitha had never seen before. He was helping move a large cooler toward the food tables. Even from a distance, there was something about him that caught her attention. He moved with quiet confidence, focused but relaxed. Well, her friend nudged her playfully. "Let's go say hello." They walked across the grass toward Bo. Bo spotted them and smiled widely. "Wamaitha! Good to see you." "Hi, Bo," she said warmly. Then Bo turned toward the man beside him. "Oh, I should introduce you. This is my younger brother, Min-jie." Min-jie looked up. For a brief moment his eyes met Wamaitha's, and something inside him shifted. "Nice to meet you," she said politely. But before the moment could continue, someone called Bo's name from across the field. He excused himself, leaving them standing there for a moment. They exchanged a few polite sentences before another group approached, and the conversation naturally drifted apart. The interaction lasted less than 2 minutes, but for Min-jie, it was enough. Later that afternoon, as the picnic continued, he found himself noticing her again and again. She laughed easily with people. She moved from conversation to conversation with warmth and kindness. At one point, while walking across the grass, she accidentally hit her toe against the leg of a folding chair. She stopped suddenly. For a moment, it looked like she might cry, but she quickly forced a smile and continued walking. From across the field, Min-jie watched, and without understanding why, he felt a sudden urge to walk over and comfort her. He didn't. Instead, he stood quietly where he was. But the feeling stayed with him. That night, the memory of her followed him home. At first he dismissed it. He had met many people in his life. There was no reason for this moment to matter. Yet the image of her laughing with friends kept returning to his mind. The next morning he found himself thinking about her again and again. By Monday morning he finally sighed and spoke out loud during his prayer. "God, if she's not meant for me, please remove her from my mind." It seemed like a reasonable prayer, but the opposite happened. The more he tried to forget her, the clearer her memory became. By Wednesday, he decided to fast and pray for 3 days. He told himself he would seek clarity. If the feeling disappeared after the fast, then he would know it had simply been an emotion. But when the fast ended, the feeling was still there, stronger than before. By the second week, he could no longer ignore it. One Wednesday afternoon, he drove to the radio station. He parked quietly and waited in the car. When Wamaitha finished her shift that evening, she was gathering her bag when her phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Hi. This is Min-jie, boss brother. We met at the picnic." "Oh, hi." He sounded slightly nervous. "Are you still at work?" "I'm actually just leaving. I came by the station," he said carefully. "There's something I wanted to say to you." She paused. "You're here?" "Yes, in the parking lot." She smiled slightly. "Well, I'm already on my way out." When she stepped outside, she saw him standing beside his car. This time, he was wearing a suit. And the moment she saw him clearly, She remembered thinking the same thing she had thought at the picnic. He's very good-looking. But in the suit, he somehow looked even better. They exchanged greetings before he asked casually, "Did you drive today?" "My car actually had an issue this morning," she said. "I took a taxi to work." "Then let me drive you home," he offered. She shook her head politely. "No, it's okay. I'll get another taxi. I cleared my schedule for you today," he said simply, "so that we could have this conversation. The one I mentioned I needed to have with you." She blinked. He continued before she could respond. "I could drop you home after. We could grab a cup of coffee somewhere first." She considered this for a moment. "We could grab coffee here in the cafeteria." She paused, then quickly added, "Actually, it's usually full of my colleagues." "Then let's go somewhere else," he said. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "That's fine." They drove for a while, making light conversation. Eventually, they arrived at an elegant hotel overlooking the city. Wamaitha looked around as they walked inside. "Do we need reservations for places like this?" He didn't answer immediately. At the entrance, a staff member greeted him warmly. "Welcome back, sir." Min-jie nodded politely. "Thank you." They were led into a private dining room with large windows overlooking the glowing city lights. Wamaitha walked toward the window. "Oh my, the view is beautiful." Behind her, Min-jie watched quietly. "Yes," he said softly. "Extremely beautiful." Dinner conversation began lightly, but eventually Min-jie leaned forward slightly. "Should I start from the beginning?" he asked, "or go straight to the point?" She laughed. "The beginning." He nodded once. "I want to marry you." Her smile disappeared. "What? I want to marry you?" She laughed nervously. "That's not funny. I'm not joking." The silence between them stretched. Finally she asked, "Why?" "There is something about you," he said slowly, "and it bothers me terribly." She frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "At the picnic. I couldn't stop noticing you. You were talking to people, laughing. I found myself wishing I was part of every conversation you were in. And when you hurt your toe, I wanted to go over and hold you." He looked down briefly. "No one has ever made me feel that way before." "You don't know me. I know enough to want to try," he said. She shook her head slightly. "Min-jie, I don't think what you've described is enough reason to want to marry someone." He held her gaze. "I know," he said quietly, "but I've never felt this way before. Not once. Not about anyone. I prayed about this, and I want you to do the same." Later she asked quietly, "What about your parents?" "I'm black, and I'm older than you." He smiled. To him that question meant she was truly considering it. "That won't matter to them," he said. "And if it does, I'll handle it." When he dropped her home, he hesitated before she stepped out. "I'm stopping myself from hugging you right now," he admitted. The next morning she woke to a message. "I'm downstairs on my way to the airport. Can I see you for a minute?" She came down. He looked relieved to see her. "May I hug you?" he asked. She shook her head no. "Maybe next time," she said. She glanced at her watch. "You should go. You're going to be late." She looked at him one last time. "Have a safe trip. May God go before you, and may He go with you." She turned to walk away. That was when he stepped forward. Gently, he turned her toward him and kissed her forehead. Then he left for the airport. The days after the forehead kiss were quieter than she expected. Wamaitha went about her life as usual, her shifts at the radio station, her routines, her prayers. But something had changed in the texture of her days. A question had settled into the back of her mind and refused to leave. Is this real? And more importantly, is this God? She had learned long ago not to let her feelings lead her without first bringing them to God. So she did what she knew how to do. She fasted. She prayed. She asked God to close every door that wasn't His will and open only what was. There were moments during those quiet days when she found herself replaying everything. The way He had spoken so directly. The way He had said, "I want to marry you," as if it were the most natural sentence in the world. The way he had stood in the parking lot that morning and still taken a moment to come find her. She thought about the forehead kiss more than she wanted to admit, but she kept her thoughts anchored in prayer. Lord, if this is you, make it clear. A week passed, and in the quiet of that week, something unexpected happened. The peace she had been asking God for, she found it. Not because she had all the answers, but because she had learned to trust the one who did. Then her phone buzzed. A message from him, not to pressure you. But is it a go or a no-go? She laughed out loud. Only Min-jie could make something so serious sound so matter-of-fact. From that day forward they spoke every day. Calls that started short and stretched into hours. Texts sent in the middle of the day, sometimes just a thought, sometimes a joke, sometimes a verse. Long conversations about faith, about family, about the kind of life they each wanted to build. Late-night laughter that surprised her, the kind that made her stomach hurt and her cheeks ache. She hadn't laughed like that in a long time. And slowly, in the way that only the most honest things grow, they began to fall in love. Not because of a single dramatic moment, but because of all the small, consistent, faithful ones. On Christmas Eve morning, she noticed he hadn't called the day before. She made coffee, then her phone buzzed. A message from him. There's a Christmas gift at your door. Don't say I never spoil you. She smiled and opened the door, and there he was, standing there with gifts in his arms. He pulled her into a hug. I missed you. That evening he took her to dinner and asked her to officially be his girlfriend. She said yes. Their relationship had a quality that surprised her. It was easy, not in a shallow way, but in the way that only the right things are easy. Natural, unburdened, like breathing. They traveled together when they could, sometimes short trips to nearby towns, sometimes longer journeys to places neither of them had been before. Min-jie had a way of planning things without making a fuss about it. Wamaitha would simply find herself somewhere beautiful, wondering how he had arranged it all so quietly. But of all the things they did together, the amusement park stood out. It had been his suggestion, completely out of nowhere. An amusement park? She raised an eyebrow. Yes, he said simply. And so they went. From the moment they walked through the gates, something shifted in her. She couldn't explain it exactly, but somewhere between the rides and the carnival food and the way Min-jie laughed, unselfconsciously, fully, she felt something loosen inside her, a tension she hadn't known she was carrying. They rode everything twice. She screamed on the drops and laughed at herself for screaming. He won her something small at one of the game stalls. Nothing expensive, just the principle of it, and she kept it. At one point they sat side by side eating ice cream in the afternoon sun, saying nothing in particular, just present. She looked at him in that moment and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Completely carefree. Like a younger version of herself had been given permission to come back. Min-jie noticed her smile. What? He asked. Nothing, she said. But she meant everything. By the third month, she met his parents. The drive to his parents' home was quiet. Wamaitha sat with her hands folded in her lap, looking out the window at the passing streets. She had prayed that morning. Lord, let whatever is meant to be, be. Min-jie glanced at her from time to time. You're quiet, he observed. I'm thinking, she said, about? She smiled faintly. Everything. He reached over and briefly covered her hand with his. It will be fine, he said simply. She believed him, or at least she tried to. His parents received them in the sitting room. His mother was poised and observant. His father measured his words carefully. There was a politeness in the air that was not unkind, but it was watchful. She was aware of what she represented to them. A woman older than their son, a different background. An unexpected choice, but Wamaitha had not come empty. She came with warmth, with genuine interest in who they were. She listened more than she spoke. She asked questions about their lives, their history, the things they loved. And slowly, over the course of the afternoon, the careful politeness began to soften. But it was one particular moment that changed everything. His mother said something, and Min-jie laughed. He turned to Wamaitha to share the joke, instinctively, naturally, the way people turn toward the person they love. His parents saw it. The way he looked at her. Not with infatuation, with certainty. The kind of look that has nothing left to prove. His mother's expression changed first. Something in her eyes settled. His father nodded quietly, almost imperceptibly, as if confirming something he had just understood. The hesitation didn't disappear all at once, but it began to. And by the time they said goodbye, his mother held Wamaitha's hand a moment longer than necessary. "Come back soon," she said. It was enough. 6 months after the night he first asked her to marry him, he asked again. She hadn't expected it that evening. They had been out together, a quiet dinner, easy conversation, the kind of night that felt like 100 others they had shared. She had no reason to suspect anything was different. But Min-jie had always been a man who moved with intention. He chose the moment carefully. Not a grand, public setting. Not a performance. Just the two of them. The same privacy in which everything between them had grown. He became quieter as the evening drew on. She noticed, she always noticed, but said nothing. Then he stopped, reached into his pocket, and knelt. The sight of him on one knee made her breath catch in a way she hadn't anticipated, because she already knew him. She knew how he prayed. She knew how he loved. She knew that this man had chosen her with his whole mind before he had ever even held her hand. "I wanted to do this in the 2nd month," he admitted. She laughed through the tears already forming. "But I tried to be patient." He looked up at her, the same eyes that had found her at a church picnic and simply known. "Will you marry me?" She didn't need to think. She had already prayed. She'd already fasted. She had already watched this man show up faithfully, consistently, without pretense, for 6 straight months. The answer had been forming long before he asked the question. "Yes," she said, and the certainty in her voice matched everything he had felt since the very beginning. Their first Christmas morning together was spent in church, side by side, hands gently intertwined. The church was full that morning. Families in their best clothes filled the pews. Children sat wide-eyed beside their parents. The worship music rose and fell through the decorated hall like something alive. Wamaitha sat beside Min-jie and felt the quiet weight of the moment settle over her. A year ago she had not known his name. She had not known that a church picnic on an ordinary Saturday afternoon would become the beginning of the most unexpected chapter of her life. She had not prayed for this specifically. She had simply prayed, as she always had, that God would order her steps. And he had. In a way she never would have written herself. Through a man who was too certain too soon. Who had fasted before he even knew her last name. Who had driven to her workplace and waited in the parking lot because he couldn't not. Who had kissed her forehead on a Tuesday morning before leaving for the airport and somehow made that the most memorable goodbye she had ever received. Min-jie's hand found hers in the pew. Gently, without making a fuss of it. The way he did everything. She looked at him. He was already looking forward, eyes on the altar, expression quiet and full. She turned back to the front as well. And in the warmth of that Christmas morning, in the middle of a congregation lifting voices in gratitude, Wamaitha added her own. Silent, simple. Thank you. For the picnic she almost didn't attend. For the man who was certain when she was still learning to be. For a love story she never could have planned. But one that had been written long before she arrived. He fasted before he knew her last name. He cleared his schedule for a woman he had spoken to for less than 2 minutes. He said, "I want to marry you over dinner on the first proper evening they had ever shared." And then he waited. Faithfully, patiently, consistently. Because some people don't need more time to be certain. They just need God to confirm what they already know. If this story found you today, whether you're the one waiting to be found or the one still learning to believe the person in front of you, this story was for you. Subscribe to Written by Grace, Faith and Forever Stories. Share this with someone who needs to see it. And remember, sometimes God gives one person the certainty first, so the other person has time to catch up.